I lived in Klondike most of my life. It was a community where everything that you needed was there. And over a period of years, people started moving out of the community, and that left a lot of devastation.
Big chunks of the urban core in Memphis have become blighted, and the neighborhoods that still show promise are being bought up by large companies.
Groups that purchase single-family homes across the country. There are a number of them with over 1,000 properties that are in the city of Memphis. And so individuals are competing, their offers are competing with cash that is being put down by these investors.
This is a way for outsiders to come in and move people out.
A lot of the properties that we're saving were on the demolition list. If you demolish it, the thing that you're going to put in place of is going to take $120,000. Why not just spend $60,000 or $70,000 rehabbing it and getting it back to life for somebody to move into it? This property was in complete disrepair when we first got it. We had to gut it out and make everything brand new, so it's brand new sheetrock, window cases, windows, baseboards, something you would expect to find in like a suburb neighborhood. Is right here in Klondike. I used to have arguments with my friend of mine that we grew up. We used to hang out in this neighborhood. I used to tell him, I used to say, hey man, we better do a lot of development in Klondike and in Smoky City. And he would say, nobody's gonna wanna move it over here. Why wouldn't somebody move in this neighborhood for $700 or for $600 or for $800 when they're spending $1,200 anywhere else? And now, if that's different from any other neighborhood, we can build in the affordable housing before the gentrifiers come in and develop the market rate housing.
And so we have to figure out what's going to be the best way for Memphis to develop. There was a law that was passed that allows local government land banks to be able to hold properties for 5 years for redevelopment purposes. And so they amassed over 200 properties, and rather than trying to identify a for-profit developer, they wanted to identify a community-oriented approach.
We have an opportunity to do something about the way our community looks. So what are we going to do with these lots?
What is the secret though? We're able to provide affordable rent, but it's still cash flowing, it's not a loss. And hopefully we'll be able to already build in the affordable housing before the secret gets out.
So I think the secret is already out. But I get a lot of calls and letters for the 2 properties that I own in Klondike.
Yeah.
I mean, every week somebody's calling me, asking me if I want to sell. Plumbing and sheetrock are my weaknesses. We do really good in the carpentry. Exterior, I replace all the wood and all that stuff on all my properties.
It's one of my strengths. It's the plumbing.
Oh, okay.
And so like, if we can cross-train enough people, because I can't do it all myself, that'll bridge the gaps.
I always heard that there was a shortage of rentals.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that. I think it's a shortage of good rentals. And that, to me, that's our mission, is to make these properties, the rentals, quality rentals.
I can sit behind a desk and make all kinds of decisions about economic development, but unless I have the input of the community, my ideas are null and void.
It wasn't just all about cutting the grass. It's much deeper than that. The future plans are to build multi-dwelling homes, and until we get to that point, they need to see that the people in the Klondike and the Smoky City area revitalizing the community and keeping the community clean.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. For those who don't know me, my name is Meka Egwekwe.
I'm Executive Director at Code Crew. And I am going to introduce our panel today. But before that, I thought I might introduce some concepts, if you will, for us to chew on as well as a panel and as a community. For those who don't know me, again, my name is Meka Igwekwe. I'm Executive Director at Code Crew. We are a nonprofit that teaches kids and adults to write software. And so we teach them up and down from conversational thinking to how to make effective use of data. We're in an increasingly data-driven society. And so I thought I might start by sharing a few comments around this concept of data. Like, for example, what is data? And fundamentally, data is just a collection of facts. It is numbers, it's words, it's measurements, it's observations. It is, today, we typically think about data as this collection of facts that is translated into a form that computers can process or analyze and so forth. Though data obviously has been around much longer than we've had modern computers. But why is data important? There are a lot of reasons. I love what the Council on Quality and Leadership says about data. That they've got 12 points. I won't go over all of those things, but a few of them I think are worth bringing to the table. One of them is that data can improve people's lives. Through measuring, you can take effective action. Right? It equips you to make informed decisions. Because data is knowledge. It's not perception and so forth. You're dealing with reality, and it helps you to avoid making mountains out of molehills because for example, you're moving early because you're informed by data, and it equips you to move early before things get out of hand. It equips you to stop guessing, right, and stop having an overdependence. It helps you become strategic. You can actually plan for the results that you want and know how effective you are and know whether or not you're doing well in any sort of initiative if it's data driven and data informed. And it helps you find solutions to problems, right? And it also helps you back up your arguments, right? Any cases that you make about the reality of our situations today. And of course, whether it's government, whether it's private entities, whether it's individuals, it helps you make the most out of funding, make the most out of your dollars. And so data is important because it equips you with making sound decisions in a timely manner and as efficiently and cost efficiently as possible. And the reality with data is that in our city and in our country, we've got a long history of where data has been abused, it's been manipulated, it's been used against people, especially with respect to race, right? And it takes advantage of, well, I'll say it this way, that there's a myth, I believe it's a myth, that you can make data say whatever you want. That's not exactly true. Data has been abused and manipulated to take advantage of many people's lack of understanding of data and the definitions associated with data. Right? And so if we as a community, as an educational system, as a society do a better job of equipping people with understanding data and understanding those related definitions with respect to data, there'll be fewer opportunities for that data to be abused and manipulated against the will of the community. And you can look no further than crime statistics, for example, that are often presented in incomplete ways and incomplete context designed to scare people, right? Crime is an unfortunate reality, but it's exacerbated. The perceptions and fears are exacerbated by the abuse of data oftentimes. With respect to race in our city and in our country, a sad history in the housing context of redlining, for African Americans and other groups to be relegated to certain neighborhoods without the ability to get fiscal support, financial support, and we still live with this legacy today. History has got lots of conditions or lots of situations where the conditions that we live in today are great examples, unfortunate examples of the abuse and manipulation of data. And so we have as a society, I am a firm believer, certainly, that we as a society need to share and perpetuate and help educate the greater community at large for our own societal benefit, such that data is not used against people, data is used for people, so that we can improve people's lives. We can make informed decisions. We can do all those things efficiently, effectively for vibrant communities. And so with that, I'm going to pass the mic, if you will, to Sarah, our moderator, and I may also share just a couple of links here too with more information for data. I'll drop into the chat when as Sarah is speaking. So again, welcome everyone to what I'm looking forward to being a great and outstanding session around data, but also around the greater picture of neighborhood information for action. Thank you, and Sarah.
Thank you, Mecca, for that introduction. My name is Sarah Harris. I'm the Senior Performance Analyst with the City of Memphis's Office of Performance Management. We work with the different divisions in the city to help them use their data and then use it to drive operational decisions. We also run the Memphis Data Hub, which is the city's first open data portal. It is live at data.memphistn.gov. I'll drop that link in the chat as well. And that has all the city's data that we've released to the public on it. And so there's a report card sort of dashboard where you can see how we're performing on certain metrics. There's different map features. You can see HCD was recently released, so all of the HCD housing projects are on the map. We have crime data, service request data, and then there's different data stories on there as well. And that's something I think we'll talk a little bit about later when we talk about community engagement and how we can tell a story with the data and why that's important when we communicate with the citizens. I'm joined today by Ms. Morris from Housing NOLA and Tony Smith with Innovate Memphis. And so I'm going to pass it to you, Ms. Morris, and let you introduce yourself and just describe the work you do down in New Orleans.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andronika Morris. I'm executive director of a group called Housing NOLA. And what Housing NOLA is, it's a public-private partnership to actually end housing insecurity in the city of New Orleans by using data first and foremost, and by engaging with elected officials, policymakers, developers, advocates, and having community make decisions around that strategy, and then monitoring that 10-year plan and issuing semi-annual and annual reports that mark how well or poorly we're doing. We temper this also with an aggressive advocacy strategy by our 501c4 partner that also issues candidate scorecards and is entertaining right now a recall for one elected official who shall remain nameless because of their failure to abide by this strategy. So that's what I do, and that's part of the reason that I was asked to be about part of this panel, because to Mecca's point, we have been victimized by people who've manipulated data, and now community in their hands is using data to evaluate their own condition and to demand results, and to evaluate whether or not the suggestions offered by policymakers or elected officials actually works to improve their conditions, instead of letting them excuse their poor behavior or their lack of efforts by, well, we tried. And Antonio, you're gonna go. I'm gonna get back to you, Sarah. That's it. I can talk a lot. I'm gonna try and be succinct. Oh, you're still muted.
Of course. I'm going to pass it back to you, Tony, and let you introduce yourself and the work you've been doing with Innovate.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Sarah and everybody as part of this panel. Great to be here today. As I said, my name is Tony Smith. I'm the data lead for Innovate Memphis. I've been on board for about 5 months now with the organization. Innovate Memphis it's a brainchild of the Bloomberg philanthropy team. We are a nonprofit entity. We are an extension of the mayor's innovative platform. So we do a lot of work here in the community, from data works to 901 right choice to and data engagement to all kind of community grassroots level work with our cohorts across the aisle here in the Memphis and Shelby County area. So very happy to be here to engage with you guys today in this talking about something that's so very near and dear to my heart, which is data. I get very excited about it. You know, some people think that, you know, we're data nerds to some degree, and that's fine. I accept that. But, you know, it makes me excited to share this information that's so useful. You know, data to me is just a tool, and you're hearing me touch on that a little bit more. And the tools in the right hand can be used the right way to affect change in our society as a whole.
Absolutely. Kind of, I guess, branching off that, and I'll let you all both comment on this. Mecca kicked us off with kind of that, what is data? And we felt like that was important because I don't know about you, but when I describe my job, I get blank stares all the time. People are like, what are you talking about? And so just really, when you guys approach community engagement and bringing this into the public, how do you approach it? How do you approach data? How do you make it palpable to the people that maybe have never thought about it that way before? And how do you, I guess, express why people should care when we start talking about data and data analytics and why we put so much work into that? Ms. Morris, I'll let you start with your experience in New Orleans.
Sure. So from a practical standpoint, as I mentioned, we are working on ending housing insecurity. And in New Orleans is a majority African-American community, and you would think that we had managed to grapple with the racialized history around housing bias. We have not, actually. Here in New Orleans, the racial aspects of housing has been internalized. The systemic racism inside of it has been internalized, and it's often expressed as classism by African-American community members. And then it's picked up by white community members who find themselves uttering and repeating things that they heard from Black people about housing. And then they go, oh, wait, I heard that from a Black person, so if I say it, I can't be racist, right? No. And so with that kind of emotion, with that kind of, data is the first thing to help with, one, confronting that stigma, and number two, just talking about how that kind of classism and systemic racism has destabilized the entire community. So we kind of hit them with the facts. Number one, what does it mean to have affordable housing? What is the metric that we use? Right now, we use cost burden. That's spending no more than 30% of your gross income on your total housing costs. When people hear that, they startle because they're like, well, wait, and again, these are metrics that are used. These are not the greatest metrics, but these are the metrics to qualify people for programs, to deny them for programs. This is what sets their rent in some instances. And so when people understand that those are the analytics, that those are the formulas, and then they apply that to their own lives, they realize, some of them realize, well, I'm cost burdened, and they in fact are, right? They're struggling. They may not qualify for Section 8. They may not qualify for a tax credit unit, but they are actually struggling in their own home. And so the data, it lets them see themselves with those people that they previously saw as other. And so that's one big thing that we have done with the data. And then we talk to them about, yeah, by the way, now that you've done the math on yourself, here's the other piece of the math. 60% of the renters in this city, in the city of New Orleans, are also just like you. And 50% of all New Orleanians are in the same boat. So again, they can see themselves in the data, and that allows them to stop othering folks who work just as hard and are just as valuable as they are, but they didn't think so before we talked to them.
Absolutely.
And Sarah, we lost your video, so we can't see you anymore.
I can see myself. I guess that doesn't help y'all. We'll continue anyway. Tony, what is your experience been in Memphis with how people, when you bring this to the community? I know you've only been here for 5 months, but what has your experience been with how do we communicate that to people?
I think that really the conversation kind of begins with, I think you really can't talk about authentic bottom-up change here in Memphis until you really kind of address one of the major goals when you're talking about equity-empowered solutions through data. And that's going to be one of the biggest goals, no matter where you are, what city you're in, where you're fighting a good fight when it comes to data. And those words to resonate in your mind: equity and empowerment to our people. And then what does success look like when it comes to, the end goal of what we want to achieve in our communities. So we know that these are adverse times in our communities, and millions of people are struggling. And we know that for some that, these struggles and adversities, these challenges are disproportionate, and they're glaring. And I think that during these social and economic, adversities and times we have right now, when you're fighting it in our communities, you must be, equity and power driven in our leadership when it comes to data. So most of the works here with innovating that I've worked on has fallen in those realms of empowering people to have the right information and knowledge to make informed decisions to better our communities as a whole. When it comes to, issues with dealing with evictions or housing insecurities, I've worked on different programs with that. Director Young's talked about it quite deal with a couple of nonprofits. One is particularly MPI that we work directly with as far as providing data and analytics for that particular program on the backside of it. So very integrated with, several housing programs and issues that are going on here at the forefront that are here in Memphis.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mecca, since you're still on the screen, if you don't mind, I'm going to steal you for a second. Can you comment on that too? Because I know Code Crew does a ton of community engagement at all different spectrums. How do you guys best communicate the need for data amongst the people you serve?
I don't mind being on the spot, but I mean, data is just so foundational, right? That again, to the points I made about making informed decisions, right? So how do we communicate that to those we serve? We serve both kids and adults, and so certainly there are different ways you approach sharing these concepts with kids and adults, of course. But we try to ultimately lead them to the power of what data can do for you, and again, showing them, not only that power, but then equipping them with the skills that they need to actually take advantage of that and potentially have a career or even an entrepreneurship opportunities around this data and information age that we're in. And so, we in the community, that may look like, an after school program where we've got kids that are building, say, we had some kids build an automatic basketball scorer, right? And so they were collecting data on that, right, as well, for accuracy and so forth. For adults, we actually partner with the city of Memphis and Shelby County and the census and a number of other great partners, Innovate Memphis included, for the Civic Data Hackathon, where people came together in March, right before COVID, to take all this data that we had access to from the local, state, and federal level to say, well, how do we build solutions to improve the community using this data? So we preach that gospel of computer science and data up and down in ways like that. But yeah, those are a couple of examples.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing. I love talking about this because the Memphis Data Hub that we launched back, I guess, about almost exactly a year ago. This was our second rendition. The first rendition, we just didn't do enough community outreach. And so we, released this website that just had the data, and we just kind of expected people to go use it, and they didn't. And then, so we had to kind of backtrack. Okay, how will people relate to this? What will make them use it? What do they want to see? And so we, pre-COVID, tried to bring us to different neighborhood groups, different CDCs, and show them how, with a few clicks, they can kind of see more information about specific hotspots in their neighborhood or what is going on there. So I do want to comment something, Mecca, you talked about in the intro in terms of maybe it's a myth that data can be manipulated. It's just people can abuse it and they can take advantage of people's lack of understanding of it. And so, Ms. Morris, if you want to start, what do you see as the city or the nonprofit's role in helping people understand that data? It's not like it's one thing to release the data, but is that helpful? How can we help people? What is our role in helping people understand it?
So we talked about this before, Sarah. You just mentioned it. People don't come to it because sometimes they feel overwhelmed, and so I think it is the responsibility, particularly of our government, to break that information down and to make sure that it is presented and you work with community to contextualize it so that they, and again, I saw someone say in the chat, that numbers don't lie unless they're wrong. And it's not that they don't lie, they're correct. The numbers are, but they can be weaponized by not painting the entire picture, by not telling the entire truth. One really good example of this is in New Orleans. Another stat statistic that we have is that the unemployment rate of American men in New Orleans has wavered between 40 and 52% over the last 10 years. It's a heartbreaking and horrible statistic. But a lot of people do not understand what the unemployment rate means and why our government jumps into action when the unemployment rate in general is more than 7-8%, because it is a market failure. Yet and still, when you're talking about a subset of specifically about African American men having such a high unemployment rate, while it is a market failure, that is, those African American men are willing and able to look for work and are looking for work, and they cannot find it in the market. Our government doesn't respond to that the same way. And even when they do, it is not explained correctly. And so you sometimes unintentionally reinforce the stereotypes about African Americans with that data set without properly explaining it, by simply saying the unemployment rate is 40% for African American men. And this has happened to me, right? Where you get confronted by people who don't know, often white people, who say, well, they don't want to work. That's not what that statistic means. That means that this market is failing them. This is systemic bias documented. And again, the fact that, and it puts government in a tough position, because they should be acting, they should be panicking. They're not, right? They're upset about it and they don't like hearing about it, but they are not acting in accordance with that data. So Sarah, we've talked about this. I know what you're trying to do, but it's also one of the things that government has to do is, as they present the information, they have to be prepared to act. Once you share this information with community is gonna look at you and go, so what you doing? And well, this is what we like to do. And they're like, well, that's not good enough because you brought us the stats last year and it's the same thing, Sarah. So what are you doing? And while that's not you, your bosses, the elected officials who are ultimately the ones who have to answer to community, don't often want to have those uncomfortable conversations. So again, that's why you get this big data dump. And you go, and if someone stumbles across it, well, we put it out. We shared the information. You had access to this information. Elected officials and policymakers have to take more ownership than that. And that means opening themselves up to criticism.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've gone to neighborhood meetings and we've taken heat too for like, this has been the same for how many years? And like, yeah, we can see it now, but we already knew it. And what are you guys doing about it? And that's a completely valid point. And the more we use data, the more those questions come up. And I think it's important not to shy away from that and to continue to use that to build on and to actually do make change. Of course, sometimes it's easier said than done. We've tried on the Memphis Data Hub anyway, and this is more at a, I guess, internal city operational level, communicate using the data stories, what our wins, what we have done with the data and examples. And sometimes they're 3-year-long projects and it's like, we're just now seeing the payoff. But we felt like when we released this site, we'd been preaching data for so long, but we had never shown what it had done for people. We just keep talking about it, that we're using it. And we can fall prey to just falling into the buzzword trap and throwing out all these buzzwords. And so those data stories say, hey, look, we analyzed this 911 data. We found the bottlenecks in the system, and now we can answer the phones a lot faster. So when you call 911, you're not waiting a minute to answer the phone. And so we felt like that was important to communicate to the citizens to show why we do talk about data so much and why we're bringing that to them. Let's see. How do we make data available for people who want it? Because we've talked about in different groups, there's always going to be these super users that people like academic groups, University of Memphis, New Orleans, I'm sure there's equivalent in New Orleans too, that know how to use it. They're going to use it no matter what. They're going to find ways to download the data, connect to it, and all that fancy stuff. So how do we do that, but then also make it relatable and useful to the people that it's not as apparent. That's something we've looked at with that data site too. How do we make it fit all of the needs? Tony, do you want to comment on that with the work Innovate's done?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I always get asked, how you make data more easily usable, easily understandable. And I think we get kind of caught up in the whole catch-all phrase of data really kind of applies to everything. I think, the most useful, and I've heard so many definitions of what data is. I want to start there real quick. It's like data is simply, to me, is just an information tool that's utilized by the end user to make an informed decision. So, but you got to start with, the right data to begin with. You hear the people talk about garbage in, garbage out. You hear people talk about, predatory users when it comes to end using the data. You heard Ms. Morris talk about, how different stakeholders can use this information and knowledge adversely, towards, our communities, and we make these adverse decisions and whatnot, in regards to policies and decisions. So I think we need to start with, what we are trying to solve. Start with the end state in mind. And it's just like with anything else, that whole, think tank of problem solving from the end goal in mind to kind of fit, the solution to the problem. I like giving analogies. I love the analogy of like fixing a car. I got this old Volvo, it sits in my garage, and during the middle of COVID, I went out there to start it up. It didn't crank. So I didn't know what was wrong with it. I had to get it towed to the Volvo dealership to get them to look at it. First thing they did was diagnose it and figure out what the problem was. The mechanic had to figure out what was the right tool. And I think as community leaders and stakeholders, you have to figure out what's the right data tool to apply to a specific problem so we can fix it. And then not necessarily the words of like quick, adequately, permanent, a more permanent fixture, and not just putting a Band-Aid on, not rushing to solve a problem through inadvertent data or the wrong data stream or misinformation or not having the right tools to solve the problem. So that's how I conceptually kind of look at those problems and how you approach it from a data standpoint. Here at Innovate, some of the things that we've worked on here, I remember taking on some works from a nonprofit through CAF, and certain information is kind of met with a little bit of resistance and whatnot, and then you got to kind of fight the masses in regards to how you present the information, how is captured when it gives to the optics on certain information and knowledge. So you have to think about that in mind to what the end state and who's the audience, and how is it going to impact the city, the county, and all the people that's going to be applied, and how it's going to impact them as a whole. So those are my thoughts on that right there.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great points. And I see a comment too in the chat box that talks about putting the data out, but then wasn't explained. And I know from our end, we were really big about pushing it out at first, but then not explaining it. And Ms. Morris, I know on our call, we had talked about a little bit that idea, which is so counterintuitive to the current narrative around data, but that being too transparent can almost be unhelpful. And it almost confuses the matter, and then people get overwhelmed and they don't do anything with it. And so it's almost worse than if we just hadn't released it in the first place. Can you expand on that a little bit with your experience?
Sure. I mean, again, there's just that fire hose approach of providing information and then getting people, sending them down rabbit holes. While while this has happened in New Orleans, we had one of our local groups, a high level data consumer, put out a report called The House That Uncle Sam Built. And it was basically an incendiary document designed to say, oh, we're going to triple the amount of subsidized housing in New Orleans post-Katrina. Not once in that and those predictions were accurate given where we were on pace, but not once in the document did they talk about what the need was, right? And so you're going to triple, which was designed, it was inflammatory, it was a dog whistle, it was a bullhorn. Oh my God, there's going to be all of this triple public housing, triple subsidized housing. But never once did they add how much subsidized housing does New Orleans need, right? But it did its job. And so that's why, in response to that kind of thing, you want to give out all of this information. But sometimes you can overwhelm people, right? Just giving them all of the facts and figures. And if people want to get lost in it, they're like, we're all data nerds on this call. So You should give folks like us the ability to dig inside of your information and work with you on it. And frankly, that's how we get some of our best volunteers for that kind of stuff. But what the average citizen wants and need, and that's how because we think that that's transparency. But here's everything. Here's a 50-page document so you can know that I'm honest. And that should always be available. But that is not what you have to. That's not what community asked you for. They asked you to explain what's going on, and so you first need to do that. And like I said, then have the backup so someone, if someone wishes to, they can dig down around your information and say, this is here and this is there. But you've got to first answer their question, and not just keep pouring information on and on and on. And progressives, I find we are typically bad at that, right? Because we want folks to we feel that they have empowered us and to work on their behalf, and that means we have to constantly check with them and check with them and check with them, and that's a fine notion. But if they're not actually engaging, then you aren't really checking with them, right? And so here are the facts. And they know what's going on in their lives. They know that they're and that's the worst, when data or facts that are presented are counter to what people see in their everyday life. That's how they get turned off from this kind of information. And again, it's got to be contextualized. If you're one of the lucky ones, right now, I'm sitting in my office, I can go home, I have power, and I have internet. I'm also sitting in a sea of red because of Hurricane Zeta. It would be egregious of me to go, well, there's nothing wrong with our distribution system because I have internet and power at my home and my office, right? And so that the data point is true. That's true, but it's also not everybody else's experience. And so don't beat people over that. Like say, like there's an exception. There are other people, and then and make sure that they understand where they fit. Are they the exception or are they the rule?
Yeah, absolutely. I think data without people is just numbers, and then people don't know what to do with that, and they don't. And I think, and Tony, I think you touched on this, you can go down the hole of answering the wrong question. I know there's a lot of data people that have that story of they thought they were solving the problem, and then it turns out when they talked to the community, that wasn't even the issue in the first place. And so I think without contextualizing it, without the people behind the numbers, it's almost meaningless. And that's a lesson we've had to learn plenty of times. I think we have time for one more question before we have to go into the question and answer section. So audience, if you guys want to start typing in any questions you guys have, any thoughts, comments into the chat, and we're going to get to that in just a second. We'd love to hear from you guys and what your experience has been. I know we have a lot of neighborhood groups and CDCs represented on the call, so we'd love to for you guys to input as well. The one last question is, how can we use data to reduce racial inequality and to destigmatize those communities? And then again, just tying that back to how does that play into we as a city? How does that play into how we present that data?
Sorry, was I supposed to go first there?
Sure.
Well, I was muted too. I knew I was muted, and I was trying to get to it. So somebody asked for the question to be repeated in the chat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just wanted to have a dialogue about how we use data to drive down racial inequality, or how we reduce racial inequality and destigmatize communities. And then again, how that ties back to how we as city and community groups present that data to people.
So for me, it's one of the issues with this is, again, like I said, housing is very racialized. Most people don't understand that. I mean, that's how well weaponized it's been. Housing is trapped between, when you talk about affordable housing, subsidized housing, or just housing security in general, people get conjured two images: the welfare queen, the poor Black woman with too many children, or the worthy poor, right? That's where everybody kind of gets stuck. And so, you know, you get elected officials going, yeah, I want to do affordable housing, but I want to do home ownership, right? Give people a chance to work for it. And you guys are going to hear later on a fantastic presentation from fellow New Orleanian Andre Perry, who will explain to you how that game has been rigged Specifically, homeownership has been rigged against African Americans. But the welfare queen, let's deal with that, how that image of a poor Black woman with too many children, that's gender, that's race, all put together. And so the facts have to make sure to show the systemic, to show the bias, to show those actual numbers, right? So what are you talking about? You think that everyone on Section 8 is a problem? Do you know there are 17,000 voucher holders of New Orleans? You'd notice if all of them were problems, because they're not. The problems that you think they all are, you'd notice them. If this city was awash in trash and children running amok, or everything that you have, everything that your bias tells you these people are, you'd notice it. Instead, what you are relying on are prejudices and bigotry. And it's also very helpful when dealing with white policymakers and white elected officials who desperately do not want to be called racist, despite them implementing racist policies. And so you have got to push past that and start, I can't be concerned about your feelings, because here are the facts. Here are the documented impact of your decisions, or the decision that you are upholding right now. If you want to have a conversation with me outside about you being a bigot, we can do that. But we're also going to sit here and talk about the impact and the disproportionate impact your decisions or your failure to act have had on Black and brown, and in New Orleans, it's mostly Black people. And so the facts can, it's not going to take the sting out of it. I don't want to overstate the power of data, because again, it is a problem, and it's a huge racial equity problem, because so many white people want to center themselves. I don't want to be called a racist. And pro tip, don't act like one, and you probably won't get called one. But if you've done something, if you have acted inappropriately, if you've made a mistake, if you've operated inside of a racist system, and even without your knowledge, be open to hearing that and to hearing the facts, and not so focused on your feelings. And again, that's another way to pull white decision makers out of their own navel gazing. Here, you're worried about your feelings, and I'm showing you stats for thousands of households. Which one is actually more important? And if you think it's you're just wrong.
Absolutely. It looks like we're going to move into the Q&A session now. I see one, I think directed at you, Mecca, that says, your program emphasizes data. Georgia Tech has created a program that teaches data analysis, I think scroll down, to young people of color, and then work on projects. Does the replication of this kind of program help to change the dynamic of data's use? Do you want to take that one, Mecca?
I'm happy to respond to that. And I mean, the simple answer is yes. The replication of this kind of program, there is a data literacy, if you will, that needs to be more pervasive, and we need to teach that on every level. And then at the same time, especially the great advantage with young people is that obviously their futures are so bright if given access to opportunities. And not only can they use data to it's demonstrated through these projects, and ideally they would be projects like what we do at the Code Crew. We actually point kids towards projects where they can solve real problems in their communities, whether it's school health, or whether it's we even had kids address human trafficking, right, in an age-appropriate way, right? But using data for those purposes, for projects that they can do that and improve their communities, but then they're also learning skills that they can use for careers and entrepreneurship, right? So they can then, in this society that we live in that's driven by capital, right, can grow in that space to be influencers and improve the community, both in terms of real things that happen with real projects, but also the narrative and the dialogue around it. And so I fundamentally believe that we must propagate this concept of digital and data literacy, so that we can all as a society make informed decisions. So yes, to your question, Jerome James, absolutely. Does replication of it? Absolutely.
Let's see, I'm looking for, oh, I think I skipped one. So Christian says, can you provide more concrete examples of how data has led to unique or counterintuitive insights in the city of Memphis? I'll start this one off, and this, I apologize, the first example that came to mind is not housing or neighborhood related particularly, but it will help demonstrate, I think, how when you start looking at the data, it can lead you different directions. We, at one point a couple of years ago, started looking at what was driving the 311 answer time. When citizens were calling 311, it was taking a minute and a half to answer the phone, and the mayor wanted to drive that down to 30 seconds. And so we started looking at it, and we were looking at their staffing patterns, looking at it that way. And then we started looking at why people were calling 311 in the first place. And like 75% of the calls were all solid waste related. And so that let us, okay, it's like maybe the problem isn't 311, maybe we need to look at solid waste and what's going on there and how we can work with that group so the call volume isn't so high, because that was really what was the issue. And so then that embarked on the service delivery model change that I think rolled out about 1.5 years ago in terms of how the city collects bulk waste. So that's just an example of how one project led to a completely different one when we started getting into the nitty gritty of the data. Let's see. Tony or Mega, do you have an example you want to share from Memphis? Or Ms. Morris, if you can think of one in New Orleans, we can go that way too.
Yeah, I think at the forefront, COVID, and all that rich raw data that surrounds and how we interacted with it, going all the way back to February to now, and how that data and how it kind of trickled down to impacting other issues here in our communities, from housings to evictions to job-related problems. And we started off here. You guys did quite a bit of COVID-related works there at the mayor's office, and we looked at things to that nature itself, how COVID impacted other areas that I just mentioned, from a housing standpoint, from jobs to even incomes and the health of Memphians abroad. So that's a prime example of how one particular element can have such an impact or trickle down impact on other programming and other advocacy that we have here in Memphis. Such rich information and data. I mean, we can just go on and talk about that all day as far as, where the impacts is going to be, 2-3 years from now from COVID. And we don't know. We can project, we can analyze the data as best as we can, but as it is right now, it's still a very crazy situation and trying to make heads or tails of some good, reliable information as it impacts so many people on so many different levels.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Let's see. I saw one more question just come in. Data is historic regarding racial and social equity, meaning not much has changed nationally. The same communities remain disenfranchised year after year, decade after decade. By now, isn't this a human rights issue? I think we're all nodding in agreement.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's frustrating, to say the least. One of the things that has just boggled my mind in the last few months is COVID. And Antonio just started talking about that a little bit, is that as a person who's become a housing advocate, I've worked in housing my whole career, a housing advocate as a job, right, for the last 5, and understand the racial issues. But here is, if you want proof of how deep this stigma goes and how unwilling we are as a country to grapple with it, let's wrestle with the fact that in 2020, with all the craziness, the Black Lives Matter movement has taken hold in a way that it hasn't in the last few years. But it seems to have a caveat. Black Lives Matter unless you live in Section 8. Black Lives Matter unless you're a renter. Because while this is happening with COVID, there is no other clear explanation than everyone needs to be housed. You know why I know that? Because I believe every mayor, governor issued a shelter at home order. They didn't say shelter at work. They didn't say shelter at hospital. They didn't say shelter at school. And we have done nothing to substantially secure housing for all of the people who need housing in order to survive this global pandemic. And it is because it is very, very racialized. This is it. we associate poor Black people and poor Black renters with housing security, with lack of housing security. And no one, not even poor Black renters, wants to be lumped in with those people. This is a sickness, and data is this is not the only, but the data makes that apparent, makes that clear, forces them to people to confront their bias. And then what has to happen is community and advocates and developers and everybody's got to work together to make sure that there's a real change. And to Monique's question, the data has been showing this for a while, but now it is incredibly extreme, and we can no longer we should no longer accept this.
Absolutely. Let's see. Does anyone in the audience have any more questions? We have a few more minutes, so I'll wait just a second and see if any more questions come in. Let's see. Kansas, I see you asked a question too about how to obtain COVID-19 data at the community level. In my experience, I believe that's the Shelby County Health Department's releasing that data. They've taken the lead on that, and so any community level data would come from that department. So that'd be my suggestion if you were looking for that information. Okay. We'll wait just another minute, make sure no one's typing.
Add how much I love Andronika's example with respect to unemployment, right? That's an excellent example of people not understanding the definition of what it means to what that unemployment number means. That means that you're actually looking for a job, right? You're not even counted for that if you're not looking for it, right? So how can we then conclude that, well, if there's high unemployment rates, that people are lazy and not trying to work, right? People who aren't trying to work aren't looking for a job. Those high numbers are exactly a symptom of a failure of society, a failure of government, failure of policy to provide opportunities in terms of employment. So that's a great example. I when I try to get kids to understand, how data can be abused, right? It is, I say, well, if I take a cup to the ocean and I dip it into the ocean and pull up a cup of water, and I look inside and see, well, there's no whales in this cup, therefore there's no whales in the ocean, right? they get it. That's right. that data can be misrepresented, if not and misused and not used correctly, right? So I just appreciate what Andronika shared, and just so many instances of that in our society. So it looks like there's some more questions perhaps, so I'll stop there.
You're just getting shouted out, I think, and Dr. Tate is schooling us.
Absolutely, though. I love that example too. At any time at the city, we use census data or even our own data, and we start doing analysis on it. We have to ask ourselves, okay, what are the assumptions we're making? What went into these numbers? What does ABC mean? Because you can't assume that. Just like, I don't think a lot of people realize that to be counted as unemployed, you have to be looking for a job. And that's a very important nuance if you're making policy off that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Andrika, I wanted to add to that. Like,
I thought you were.
I've been around a lot of data mines for many years, but I was so pleased to hear your commentary as well. It's like very few people else can really connect data to not just the socioeconomic realm, but to political, make it to a policy realm. You made that so easily, presented today and for everyone. In fact, I think about data, some of the issues too, when you brought that up, was about the middle income wages and how politicians want to move the needle with that. They don't want to deal with that conversation because it's a social issue more so than just, talking about the wealth gap and bringing people up from their bootstrap and enabling people to provide better for themselves and families. And a lot of these issues that we have right now with housing instability, and be able to pay for your affordable housing the foremost, but if they have better wages, they can have a better life to live. So where do you start? So that whole data, segment in regards to, what do you pay people and how you move the middle in there in regards to the middle income and the lowest of the lowest, when you're dealing with the people who are poverty stricken, it's a unique conversation to have as well.
Okay. And that's part of the issue is like that, again, the data can be, that's another way data can be weaponized, because when you have all of these facts, particularly all these bad points, elected officials and policymakers say, well, where do you want me to start? I don't know. Like, really? And then, okay, then start here. Yep. Start at this place. And again, it's the data has to be used with community. It also has to be used to check, because if you start, for example, passing a living wage ordinance, New Orleans actually has the city of New Orleans has a living wage ordinance that we don't actually follow. And it was started with the best of intentions, but it's actually proof of how keeping it real goes wrong. So living wage set, initially nobody wanted to set it for City Hall itself. So the compromise was, well, any contractors with the city of New Orleans would have a living wage, which just let that sink in, that the city of New Orleans itself as an employer would not adopt a living wage, but it would set a living wage for all of its contractors for their employees. And get the wiggle room there is, number one, it's a living wage for the employees of those contractors who are employees. So if the contractor subcontracts, they don't have to be paid a living wage. They don't have to be paid the living wage. So does New Orleans have a living wage policy? No. And the data tells you that. And no one wants to have the policy conversation to go back and say, well, we need to fix this. Well, no, we did that. No, we didn't. Right. I mean, and again, those are the kind of hard policy conversations that people do not like to have, because everybody wants to land on an aircraft carrier with a mission accomplished banner behind them. And that's what politicians want. That's what all of them want. Even though that went really badly. Everybody laughs when I make that analogy. That went really badly, but that doesn't stop politicians from wanting that, even though it never works out for them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys, and we appreciate you joining us from New Orleans. I'm glad you were able to make it, Ms. Morris. Thank you, Mecca, for staying on and joining the panel as well. And Tony, we appreciate your insights, and thank you, audience, for asking great questions. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the summit.
Thank you all so much. Good luck.
Take care, guys.